Hey, good morning, First Christian Church. My focus this morning is going to be on the first few verses of Joshua chapter 5. Now, I realize that this isn't technically in our reading for today, but there's some really good stuff here. Before the Israelites could conquer Jericho, before they could advance any farther into the Promised Land, before they did anything else, God instructed them to have a mass dedication ceremony. This wasn't a party, nor did it involve God appearing with smoke and fire or performing dramatic miracles. Rather, following God's instruction, Joshua made flint knives and circumcised all the men of Israel. This was necessary because for whatever reason, none of the men who were born during the wilderness wanderings had been circumcised. So two thoughts. First, I believe that there's a lesson for us. And no, it's not that we must circumcise our male babies. Rather, I believe that it is telling that before the people could really enter into God's blessing, they had to first prepare themselves both physically and spiritually. They had to make themselves right with God. Circumcision, according to what God had told Abram in Genesis chapter 17, verse 11, was the, quote, sign of the covenant between God and them. It was a physical reminder that they belonged to God and of God's promises to them. So in Joshua chapter 5, God is reminding his people of his covenant with them, and he's calling them to take it seriously. So too, I believe, does God call us as believers to take him and his promises seriously. And we would do well to step back and evaluate our own lives from time to time. We would do well to intentionally prepare our hearts and minds to worship him. Secondly, I'm reminded of the failure of circumcision. And here's what I mean. Circumcision was a physical act that was meant to picture a spiritual reality. In Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 4, we read this instruction, quote, circumcise yourselves to the Lord. Remove the foreskins of your hearts, O men of Judah, and inhabitants of Jerusalem, lest my wrath go forth like fire, and burn with none to quench it, because of the evil of your deeds. God is pointing out that our real problem is spiritual, not physical. That our hearts need to be cleansed, that our propensity and desire to rebel and sin needs to be cut off. The whole point of the Old Testament law was to show that we couldn't do that by ourselves. The good news of the gospel is that Jesus did what we could not. His death on the cross was gruesome, painful, and bloody, just like circumcision. But his death and resurrection provided the means by which we may be spiritually reborn. A rebirth that is complete with a new heart, one that is not captive to sin. Let me close then this morning by reading from Colossians chapter 2, starting in verse 9. This is what it says. For in him, that's Jesus, the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily, and you have been filled with him who is the head of all rule and authority. In him also you were circumcised with a circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of flesh by the circumcision of Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through faith in the powerful working of God who raised him from the dead. And you, who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. So church, let's praise God for the victory of Jesus over sin and death, and let's celebrate and walk in the new life that we have received. May God bless you.